So this is an idea that I had, that quite often we get people who come to IVFDF from various places and traditions, and I include, for instance, we get Scottish dancers come down and they arrive at the Friday night Ceilidh and they go, this is similar, but not really the same as what we've done. And I thought it'd be nice to have a bit of a rundown. So, social folk dance, let's define this a bit. It's the folk dance we do for fun, not for performance. So, not Morris, Rapper, Molly, sword dance, etc. Those have social elements, of course, but they're not social folk dance, they're display folk dance. And I'm taking this to have four main types. What I'm looking at is what's happening within a festival setting, mostly. So what you would hit at IVFDF or one of the other major festivals around the country. So there's Playford, Scottish country, we get Ceilidh, both Scottish and English, mostly depending on which side of the board you are, and you get Contra. So those are the main points I'm going to hit. I'm going to hit some other bits at the end. It's a bit about squares, a bit about Irish, a bit about running set, because sometimes you see them pop up on a program and it's worth knowing what they are. This is kind of, I'm looking at the program for this festival and I want to know what I should expect. That's what we're going for. So I just want to be clear that I'm beyond my scope for various reasons. Balfolk, Euro, Scandi, International in their various combinations, historical recreation, so medieval, things like that, jive, blues and tango, I'm not covering for various reasons, mostly because I don't know enough about them to do them any sort of justice. I barely know enough about Scottish, really, to be honest, but I can do enough there. And they tend to come under a different umbrella at festivals anyway. So I'm speaking to what I know and the things that are linked together, that I think you could walk from one to the other and pick up fairly quickly. The commonalities are they're generally danced as couples in sets, be that short sets of 2, 3, 4 couples, long waist sets, squares, circles, things like that. So we've got defined groups of people dancing together as opposed to individual couples a lot of the time, although we'll mention some of those. We've got music that comes in groups of 8 beats, pulses, however you want to count it. You count to 8 and you've probably done a whole figure or half a figure. The music comes in multiples of 16 bars, and so most of those figures take 4, 8, 16 counts to do. If you think about your main tradition that you do within the social folk dance thing, I'm sure you're aware of that. They're mostly called dances. Again, some notable exceptions we'll talk about. Mostly walk through before dancing in some form. Again, notable exception to that as well. Again, they all mostly, even at the extremes of the spectrum, prioritize figures over footwork. If you can get the figures right, you can add the footwork in later. You can get away with fudging a lot of the footwork. And you don't generally need any props. So it's not like a Morris side where you need sticks or hankies or anything like that. You can turn up in your own clothes at most of these events and not have a problem joining in, even if at some of the events you might stick out a bit like a sore thumb. So I'm going to start with English Ceilidh because from my point of view it's the major dance form most people have met. If you're coming from Scotland, that's less common. If you can hear that, that's my child trying to join me. English Ceilidh, though, is relatively speaking a newcomer on the scene. It was only invented partway through last century as a name, really. We nicked it from the Scottish because people wanted something that distinguished it a bit from barn dances, which people were starting to feel sound a bit American, as well as just wanting to sort of categorize the more exuberant form that was coming in compared to country dances and things. The sets are very varied. So you have short sets, circles, long waist dances, all sorts of things. We get lots of galloping. You might have cross hand swings, or what I learned of as a Ceilidh hold swing, where you're quite close in. Notably, balances, and this is one of the things where the different styles differ. A balance is a step hop. Step on one leg, step kick, I should say, step hop. Step kick balances, so you need to be further apart from your partner than from some of the other ones. Limited footwork. If you're more advanced in the Ceilidh scene, you can definitely do more footwork, but you might come across doing heel and toe stepping. You might see, you will see hop-stepped hornpipes, so step hop, step hop, step hop, and rants sometimes, although less common than they used to be. You've got, in terms of music, it covers jigs, reels, polkas, and those step hop hornpipes. That's in contrast to, if you ever see a hornpipe in America, in terms of Contra and the names of dancers and tunes, they're not like that at all. They're flattened. So that's what we see in terms of music. Now, this is not just going to be me waffling on so much. I've got a couple of slides for each dance, and then we're going to look at some videos so we can sort of see what I'm talking about. In terms of, actually, I'm turning up at a dance. What am I expecting? You rock up at Friday night at IVFDF, whatever, that sort of thing. Casual dress, t-shirt, jeans. Some people dress up a bit more, some people don't. It's fairly casual dancing. Ceilidh is the quintessential pick up and go dancing. It really, really thrives on that sort of setting. It's bouncy. It's often loud music. You can do Ceilidh to quieter stuff, but that exuberance often goes along with a certain amount of volume. Your demographic depends on time of day, because Ceilidhs happen anywhere in a program, really. So where I'm saying it's often loud, it's not so true if we're talking about a family Ceilidh, or at a PTA or something like that. You might turn up to a Ceilidh and it's, you know, a bit more restrained. If it's the late night extra, past midnight at Ceilidh, keeping all the campers awake, it's very loud, typically. Sometimes at Ceilidh it has been louder outside the tent than inside the tent, which has been a point of contention. But in terms of demographic, you get families. You actually get families all the way through, but younger people and families at family Ceilidhs, shading older as you get later in the evening. Most relaxed of all the styles, I would say, other than Scottish Ceilidh, which we'll discuss in a second. You will find a number of people will know lots of the dances, but because of the nature of the repertoire, all of us callers have our own sort of favourites, so the repertoire just change around and we do add new things. I say it's often youngest. You tend to do a thing and then wait, so it's not too demanding on timing. Sorry. PTA, Parent Teacher Association, so school events, things like that. So, quintessential family Ceilidh. This is the Anchor Gardens at Ceilidh. And what you can see here is a lovely range of people, all ages, very young to quite old. Not massively coordinated. They are all doing this together. I mean, this is Chapelwaz, which is my favourite multi-purpose international dance. So they're close together. It's all holding together because it doesn't need too much in the way of timing coordination. It will just keep together. So it is that great accessible thing. So that's one end of the spectrum. Daytime in a pub garden. The Anchor is a pub in Ceilidh. It's got a interesting terrain because it's a sloped car park that you dance on. So that's always fun. In contrast to, this is an LNE, a late night Ceilidh. Sorry, this is an LNE, this is just an IVFDF Ceilidh. There will be people here that you may recognise, even if it's your first time. There are a few people in here, I think, who are on the Zoom call in various places. So this is Again, you can see it's not like perfectly timed or anything. That's maybe part of the joy. But there are lots of people who do know what they're doing, enough that this is Boston Tea Party. If you start to watch for long enough, Boston Tea Party always develops just specific variations that you would know. So this is a classic dance that people tend to get familiar with. So that's an evening Ceilidh. Then this is a late night Ceilidh. So this is Threepenny Bit with Gordon Potts in 2017. So a very classic pairing. You can see much more atmospheric lighting. This is 11 o'clock. There's Gordon getting everyone in. We scroll through a bit more. Flashing lights, stompy dancing. I'm keeping it relatively quiet so that I can talk over it. But you can see it's very exuberant. It is very loud. And so that's the far end of the energy level. In many ways, the most obviously energetic dance form, I would say. Right, so Scottish Ceilidh. The Scottish bits I'm going to talk about, I know less about. I don't dance them as much, but I can speak to some generalities. The Scottish Ceilidh scene is the more informal country dancing. It's fairly close to English Ceilidh in many, many ways. You've got some variation in the sets. Short sets, long way sets, couple sets. And some unusual things like Dashing White Sergeant, which is a 3-person long ways type set. So, or Circassian circle type Sicilian circle type arrangement. So, variation in the sets. Notably, the style is more stereotypically Scottish. If you've seen people doing Scottish dancing, you'll be aware of there's more arms, there's more pointy feet, things like that. Setting, it tends to be a pas de bas, which is a little step to the right, step to the left type arrangement. Circles, you tend to do nice big skippy slipped circles round. You find a lot more polkaing round than you do swinging. So at the end of a dance, you tend to find more case of a polka round than a swing. You've got the expressive arms, and I would say that the stereotypical Scottish move as a caller who's done Burns nights and things like that, the thing that sets it apart as the most commonly requested thing compared to an English Ceilidh where you'll do a Strip the Willow. The Scots Ceilidhs, you'll turn up to something if you've been booked for a Scots Ceilidh, and they'll say, we want to do Strip the Willow, and they will know which Strip the Willow dance they want to do, which tends to be Drops of Brandy or Orcadian Strip the Willow, and that is their Strip the Willow dance. So that's a very, I feel like it's a very Scottish figure. Shows up in English Ceilidh. If you're doing Drops of Brandy, it's half Strip the Willow figures. So you go down one side and then up the other side, which throws people off sometimes. In English Ceilidh, it tends to just be the full Strip the Willow down the middle. Talked about setting with the pas de basque and the polka in terms of footwork. And yes, not required. Bit more pointing of the toes and things like that tends to not go amiss with Scottish Ceilidh. Jigs, reels and polkas mostly for Scottish, some marches as well. So again, very relaxed, quite casual. More kilts than average if you're at an explicitly Scottish Ceilidh. It's a fairly limited repertoire that you come across at a Scottish compared to an English. Mostly because a lot of it is still taught in schools. It's still part of the curriculum as far as I know. And a lot of Scottish people know the dances. You will come across Gay Gordons, Dashing White Sergeant, Military Two-Step, Canadian or Highland Barn Dance, things like that. They won't necessarily be called in great detail because everyone knows them if you've gone to a local dance. If you go to Edinburgh and you go to a sort of a more touristy dance, as I did once during the Edinburgh Fringe, when I was up there anyway, they do call them because they need to, because the stupid tourists are there and we didn't know what we're doing. That does mean a lot of people will know the dances, which means you can get going a lot quicker in some ways, because just find a Scottish person who looks like they know what they're doing. They can be a bit more tight on timing. Things like the Gay Gordons, because they're a couple dance, to get good satisfaction between the two people, you do need to hit your marks. And I feel like there are more couple dances than in English dancing. So Scottish, Ceilidh, looks a bit like this. I've picked some deliberately sort of local dances. This is a sort of community dance I found on YouTube. And you can see they've announced it. They're not calling it. Band at the back. And people are just sort of getting up and getting going as they go, oh, actually, I do like this one. And as we go through this, more people join in. But there's no instruction here, because people know the dances, which is a lovely community thing. This is the Science Ceilidh Band, who are active up in Scotland at the moment. They are IVFDF goers. They write dances based on scientific concepts. So this is a more atmospheric in many ways, but you know, it's all community dance. But this is, as you can see, a Strip the Willow dance, which they have dressed up as being something to do with angular momentum. But it's just a thing that everyone knows how to do, really, because they've encountered it at school, they've encountered it at parties, it's part of the culture. The flip side of Scottish that you are more likely to meet at a festival is Scottish country. This is the only major style that you'll meet at a festival that has a governing body, the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society, RSCDS, who put out syllabuses for teaching, levels you have to meet, certify examiners, and generally make sure that Scottish country dance goes in a direction and keeps to a standard. You don't have that for any of the other major social dance styles, which has benefits and problems, which we don't need to get into. That's just where they are at. It keeps it going in a very definite way. You might meet this, you won't meet this as an evening dance, typically at an English festival. You'll meet this as a workshop. IVFDF is really the only one that has a regular Scottish country dance as part of its programme. We actually get funding from the RSCDS for that dance every year, which is fantastic. Keeps it in the programme, keeps us doing it, and it has brought a fair number of people into Scottish country dancing. Sets are varied. There are some short sets, there are some long way sets. Notable set that I was very surprised by when I first noticed it. A triple minor dance is a dance where there are three couples dancing together, and in Playford you would have, and some other dances, you'd have three couples and three couples and three couples as the minor set for those dances. Scottish country dancing tends to do this as a four-couple triple minor dance, where you have three couples who are active doing the dance and one couple properly inactive, and then they swap round after a couple of times through the dance. So that's something to look out for if you find yourself as a fourth couple in a four-couple dance. You might be more inactive than you were expecting, and that might catch you out. Notable things: setting, even more pronounced Padaba, Padabasque setting, arms in certain positions. Hands across is the name of a star in Scottish country. Hands around is a circle. For the Contra dancers, Alamans are not necessarily hand turns. They may be more of a turn under. chains, whilst they do tend to be a full across and back chain, are danced open rather than with a closed courtesy turn we might have in Contra, as are right and left throughs. So it's a more expansive dance form. And the other thing that's not on my slides here that I was reminded of today is poussettes. In Scottish, there are a number of different poussettes, and it might be specified, but they tend to be danced out, across, and back. So they take a bit longer time than a push-pull poussette or a draw poussette you might come across in other styles, which I'll talk about when we get to those. So you sort of move as a unit around, pivoting around your partner. I've described the footwork as pointy, which is to do with the toes. It's bouncy, except where it isn't. I am not going to get into strathspeys because I do not understand strathspeys, but it has its own set of tunes there, strathspeys, which are very much a style onto their own and a much more flowing, I suppose, might be one way of describing it. And you do your stepping throughout, so it's not just a sort of bit here and there. You're doing stepping; it is part of the dance. Jigs and reels, often a single chord introduction, whereas you might be used to a longer intro for Contra or Playford or Ceilidh. It's often one chord and then you're in. Just a musical choice. What to expect? Lots of kilts. It's a higher standard of dancing. They pre-publish the dance running order for a reason. At a formal ball, at a regional ball, for instance, you would probably have learnt those dances in advance at your class. There are classes for Scottish country, and I would recommend that you try to go to some before turning up at a full-on ball. It would probably be a bit weird not to. They tend to be emceed rather than called, typically, I would say. Although that is very different. Yes, indeed. So you can fit more dances into a night as well, because they're not faffing around with walking people through and things like that. You can purchase cribs to help you out as well. So Scottish country has a lot of knowledge that you can get before. So you can get these cribs, and the crib diagrams are fantastic, and one day I will get my head around them properly because they're brilliant. It's a visual way of explaining the dances. You wouldn't want to learn a dance from it entirely if you didn't have to, but you could. Most people at a ball will know the dances because they've learnt them in advance, and there are ones that come round again and again and are expected. So if someone says, do you want to come to this Highland ball, and you don't do Highland dancing, not Highland dancing, Scottish country dancing, do you want to come to this ball, that ball? You probably want to go to some classes first. IVFDF is a notable exception, I would say, and these societies in general. We always have callers for IVFDF, who are people who have practiced calling and often are IVFDF goers themselves, which is really handy. The people for the country dance this weekend have been doing the online stuff, so they're practiced in the online Scottish country and what that involves this year. So I didn't want to misrepresent by picking just anything for Scottish country, so this is their AGM from 2017. That seemed fair as an example. As you can see, a high number of kilts. This is also obviously a full-on formal event. So kilts, jackets, waistcoats, evening gowns, but you can see that everyone really does know. Compare the lines and the tightness to when we were looking at the Ceilidh and the in both forms. This is a much more neat dance form, and you can see arms up, things like that, lovely pointy feet going around, all of those sorts of things. So that's Scottish. I also wanted to show you this, which is the Cambridge Strathspey Reel Club. I thought it would be good to have an actual university side. And at this point, I'm going to mention, but then quickly move on from the fact there is a third type of Scottish dancing. You never see it at festivals, which is reeling, and I don't understand it and where it fits in, really. So I will leave that to my Scottish colleagues to explain that to you if you wish to know. But very formal Ceilidh is how I had it described to me. But I don't want to start getting into that. But the Strathspey Reel Club from Cambridge do not do reeling, as I discovered from their website, which I found most confusing. But this is a demo they did to show you what they do.
The second one is called Double the Bay, and the third one you should pay particular attention to. It's called Postage Jig, and after we've done it, you're going to be doing it. Yes, let's go.
So you can, in fact, I think I saw Edmund on the participants list earlier. That's Edmund there, down at the bottom. One thing I just saw scrolling past in the chat, I'm not really touching upon calling styles. All the dance forms have some gendered and some non-gendered calling. I will say RCDS formables are more likely to be gendered because that is the style as determined. But IVFDF has had gender-free calling for the last couple of years. So you see nice, neat patterns. People know what they do. Obviously, this is a demonstration, so they have practiced before, I hope. But there you go. Okay. Now we get onto something I can talk about for hours, because this is one of the styles I actively call and pursue calling, which is Playford. And it feels weird to me. I'm doing this in sort of commonalities rather than anything else. Playford is the first one, really. In 1651, John Playford published an English Dancing Master, the first formal set of printed dance instructions collected together with tunes that we have. There are dances from before. They're not collected together particularly. There are manuscripts with a few in. But Playford was the first one to put together clear dancing conventions that we take forwards. They set figures. There's a clear understanding that people knew how dancing worked, so it's clear that this wasn't him inventing it. He just collected it together. And like I said, I can go on for hours, so I'm going to consciously not do so. The sets are varied. There are short sets, 2 couple sets, 3 couple sets, fairly common in the earlier dances. Circles, long ways dances. As you go later through Playford dancing, as opposed to Playford's publications, stretches over a few hundred years. So the style evolves, and as you go later, they become more commonly long ways dances, and then you shade into other styles of dancing. Notable figures. Siding is a figure that really only shows up in Playford, and there are 2 types, because Cecil Sharp, when he first interpreted these dances, didn't know what it was, which is fair. All he had was something saying, side with your partner. He came up with something that's similar to the Morris half jip, where you go forwards on a curved path around your partner and turn to face back, and then come back along that same path. Nowadays, we generally think that it's probably more like it's just a forwards and back to stand next to your partner's right shoulder and then left shoulder. We've actually found diagrams, and Andrew Swain can show you the diagrams if you ask him nicely, of that. So simplified it a bit. But it's worth knowing there are these 2 things. And if someone says, we're going to do Cecil Sharp siding, they mean a slightly different thing. Turning single is turning on the spot. hands across for right-hand stars sometimes. There's no swinging in Playford. They hadn't invented anything really like that. It's even more stop-start in some places than Ceilidh, but hitting your mark absolutely bang on time is the mark of a really good dancer in any genre anyway. Footwork. No formal footwork noted, but we do have singles and doubles. A single being a step and close, and a double being 3 steps and close. So it's 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are noted in the introduction to the book. And that's it. That's all Playford says in the first book about footwork, and it's not really discussed in any of the English dancing texts until you get much later. And setting is a little step to the right and a step to the left. Not as bouncy as a Scottish set or anything like that. Yeah, there is the Padarigadoon, which I'm going to ignore because it only features in one dance, really. The tunes, because they are associated with the dance, tend to be fairly set, certainly with the earlier dances. In the original Playford books, they are published with a tune above them, which is handy because that means we know exactly what the tune they were expecting to do it with. There are a few which are notably different if you want to get into it, but they're often set tunes. There is sometimes a little bit of disagreement on exactly how those tunes are played because they didn't quite have the notation we have now. He ran out of sharps, I think, towards the end of the book. Again, Andrew Swain can tell you about that. But there is the characteristic 3/2 hornpipe in Playford, which is not a bouncy step hop hornpipe. It's counting to 6, not 8. It's a different time signature entirely, which mostly serves to make lovely flowing dances and break callers because we are so used to counting to 8 that we have to consciously think we're only doing 6. The hole in the wall, if you come across it, is a classic example of this. Now, Playford, because of all of that, what to expect, it feels more formal than Ceilidh and Contra. Can be on the level of Scottish country in terms of walking into a room and going, oh, all these people are wearing costumes and that is scary. If you go to a ball, Jane Austen ball you sometimes see, or various other Bath ball, things like that, yes, lots of people will be wearing costumes. Doesn't have to be historically accurate. If you were invited to a Playford ball, you could just turn up in black tie, evening gown, smart suit, and do pretty well. Less so at festivals. At the feature ball of Whitby or Sidmouth, you will probably find people dressing up. You'll certainly find people dressing up. Much less. I tend to use a certain amount of what I consider to be my social capital to turn up in jeans and a waistcoat at some of those balls because I think it's important that everyone feels welcome. I have been known to turn up with a set of emergency masks. Again, none of the people who are turning up in costume are thinking that they are better. They are having fun as well. This is not a uniform or anything like that, and they will not judge people for not having a costume or for not having the right costume. You won't see that at workshops unless you're going to something specialised. People did dress up each day when I did the week at Halsey Manor, for instance, and you certainly won't see serious dressing up at a Zesty Playford. My emergency masks were domino masks for people to pretend that they were in mask ball territory. So it feels a little more formal, not much. A number of people will know a lot of the dances, and some of them will have opinions. This usually impinges more on the caller than it does on the other dancers. And people are getting more used to the fact that we do have a lot of different interpretations, I think, of some things. It is often the oldest demographic, I would say, except in certain situations like IVFDF and the zesty dances, which I'll explain in a sec. It's often danced a bit slower, again, depending on the context. So here's a Playford ball. This is actually an American Playford ball. And you can see most people dressed smartly, some historical costumes. Musically tends to be fairly nice and simple and elegant. So that's, keep that going. So you can see that this, plenty of space typically at Playford ball. People don't like to be boxed in too much. Decent lighting so you can see what you're doing and you can see each other's costumes and things like that. So that's one end of the spectrum, a Playford ball, through to this. So this is Coventry Zesty Playford. Now, Zesty Playford, the idea was coined by Roger Davis, who wrote a little sort of manifesto about Playford and how it should be fun and how he thinks it should be danced. Taking the idea from Zesty Contras, a book written, compiled and written by Larry Jennings in America, which sort of was aimed at boosting energy levels in Contras as well. And we did some in Coventry. So you'll see it's a bit darker, a little bit less space, a lot more students. If you look carefully, there's quite a few people here who are definitely at IVFDF this year. But there's also a fair few people who are not at IVFDF, older people. And the band is Steam Chicken, that well-known Playford Ceilidh jazz band who we had for a couple of years for our Christmas party. So there is always play of some sort in these styles. There's always people playing with it a bit. A zesty Playford is anything described as zesty is going to be a bit more upbeat, a bit more lively. I have to be very careful here because I love the other style of Playford as well, and there are things you lose here that you don't at the other style. They're all the spectrum, but at a Playford ball you get more precise dancing, you get something a little bit more refined, but this is fun too. This is closer maybe to Ceilidh Playford, and you do see that crossover as well. You'll find a number of callers who have secretly got Playford dances in their repertoire if you look carefully. So that's Playford. And then our fourth major one, Contra. Contra's kind of what happened to Playford when it went to America and then stewed for a while and interfaced with a whole load of other bits and pieces. The sets are technically varied, but you're mostly talking about a long ways duple minor set. So you're dancing in a couple with another couple in each time through and then progressing along the set, be that along the set directly or around the side of the set if you're on a Beckett formation. There are a few other things you might come across, and my perception is more so in this country than in America in many cases. There are some triples that are danced, and you come across some squares peppered into contras over here. But you don't see so much if you go to a dance in America where you'll just be doing long ways contras. Notably, long swings. So whereas in Ceilidh you'll tend to do an 8-count swing, in Contra you will do a 12-count swing or even a 16-count swing. And at the moment, you will almost always do dances with a swing with your partner in, and people will moan if you don't. That's an expected part of the style. So that's something to be psyched up for is that you will do these long swings over and over again. So getting dizzy is a little bit more of a feature of Contra when you're starting out. Balances in Contra are forwards and back balances. They're to a person, often to your partner, before a swing. So if you just come from a Ceilidh and you're going to a Contra, you have to remember you're not doing a stamp kick balance. Otherwise, you will kick your partner as they come towards you, which is slightly embarrassing. Chains tend to be half rather than a full chain. So you go across to someone else and stop, rather than going across and back again. Same for right and left throughs. You do a right and a left and you stop. A lot of the figures are reduced in length in that way, in some way. So Contra is more likely to have half turns or 3/4 turns and things like that. For the Scottish dancers among us, Petronellas are backwards. You set and then you turn, and typically they're for all four. There are always exceptions to that, but yes, compared to Scottish, the Petronella, where it comes from, where it's actually twirl and then balance, and it's only for a couple. I have a lovely story somewhere in one of my books about how that came to be from people dancing a different dance. But yeah, now the Petronella in Contra tends to be all four people moving together. Footwork is walking. That makes it sound very sedate, but it's a purposeful, driven walk. But you will stand out like a sore thumb if you try and skip. There is a club somewhere in this country where I know there are people who will rant everything, and watching them rant a Contra is fantastic, but it is very eye-catching. So if you're trying to blend in, you just want to be doing walking. But that walking, that drive, gives you a lot of space for twirling and spinning, which you'll see a lot of people doing in various places. All of those twirls and spins are optional, but if you'll see that in reels, in do-si-dos. Actually, I spin my do-si-dos in Ceilidhs now as well as a defensive measure, because it means I can see who's coming, because you can turn into the direction you're facing. Typically 32 bar reels and jigs. Even the things that are called hornpipes are kind of really reels. There are very few slip jig Contras, which are brilliant, but very uncommon. And there are a few crooked things here and there, but mostly 32 bar reels and jigs. And Contra is relaxed. You dress for comfort. Contra, you dance for a longer time than really any of the other styles, I would say. It's a very chilled out dance form, even though it feels quite stressful sometimes when you're in the middle of the dance. If you've forgotten which direction you're going, it really won't be a problem. If someone's shouting at you about it, it's because they're very stressed as well, and they probably need a drink of water. Dressing for comfort cuts across a whole load of things. Role swapping is more common in Contra than any of the other styles at the moment. So it's best to dance with places, not faces. Just take whoever's coming at you and dance with them. It's safest that way to just keep going. Some people will know some of the dances. There are some classics, but most people won't. And in fact, one of the most popular things to do in terms of getting a crowd to go a little bit crazy is to do a medley or a no walkthrough, so that no one knows actually what's coming up. You just stick figures together and trust the caller. There's a really good age range in Contra. I sort of said that for all of them, but it is true of all of them, really. It's quite fast-paced. Compared to Ceilidh, where you'll do a thing and then stop a lot of the time, you're always moving on to the next thing. So you do this thing, then you do the next thing, then you do the next thing. In fast-paced and in a good Contra, alternating hands or directions in a way that flows really well. It's generally considered good practice to change partners between dances. There are very few partner changing dances in Contra. So you're generally safe for a dance. You get a rest at the end of the set. Don't drop out in the middle if you can at all help it, because that does get tricky. But obviously, if you're injured or you desperately need to, people will sort it out. But yeah, so that's Contra. And Contra looks a bit like this. This was 2019 IVFDF. So it's Rodring calling there. You see pretty good synchronisation between the dancers. Pretty good straight lines. Well done if you were there. And each figure just flows into the next one, but everyone is moving all at once. And now at the top we've got people out who don't have to be taking part. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum of Contra. This is IVFDF Contra. This may well have been the Friday night. I missed IVFDF 2019. I entirely blame my daughter, who was imminent. But I would say this looks like a Friday night Contra. It's pretty chilled out. It's lights up. There are some people dressed up a little bit, but nothing major. Compare this to, this is a Techno Contra, this is Buddy System. It's a different feel, lights down. Same movements. And you see a lot of people doing variations and additional embellishments. Key thing is to make sure you arrive on time after your embellishments. Okay. So those are the main ones. Hopefully now you know a little bit what you would be walking into if you walked into any of those. There are some other ones I want to quickly get through before the end of the session. Irish Set and Ceilidh. I know very little about Irish Set and Ceilidh, and you hardly ever see that in festivals over here. What you sometimes see is Irish Set workshops. Irish Ceilidh is fairly similar in demeanour to Scottish and English Ceilidh dances. It is a separate repertoire of dances a lot of the time, and yes, and I gather there are lots of opinions in the Irish community over which dances are best and which ones, how they go. Set dancing is square dancing, probably the archetypal square dance in many respects. It looks a bit like this. And this is sort of the native habitat of the Irish set dance, as I understand it. Small spaces like pubs and front rooms, things like that. So that'd be an Irish set. Kentucky running set is another one you might see on a festival program. It's, I've said name invented by Cecil Sharp because as far as I can understand it, he kind of did. He went across to Appalachia and Kentucky regions and collected this style of dancing from various people and gave it the name because people said, what he said, what are you doing? They said, we're running set. If you think about Irish set, then that's kind of where we came from. You won't see this as part of an evening dance, typically. The only place I know of it is taking a showing up like that is, I believe, in the interval of the round ball, where people tend to do it just sort of spontaneously or by tradition. It's danced in squares or Sicilian circle type formation, although that's rotated from normal. The figures tend to have specialised names and calls, so it tends to only occur at workshops at festivals. It's a continuous movement dance, so you're constantly going. And here's Bert's second cameo. So you see they're constantly moving, quite driving. There are some fantastic names for these figures. It is well worth going and doing a bit if you can at some point, just to try it out. So that's running set. Bert, I know, was in earlier. I can't see the participants list at the moment, but have a word with Bert if you're interested in that, because he has taught workshops on it. Trad and New England Squares. There is a whole wealth of square dancing out there. Traditional New England squares you'll find dropped into Contras or as workshops over here more commonly than other types of square dancing. They'll be called. They're most of the same common figures between the other social folk dances. There are some specialised figures, but those will be talked through and explained, and potentially the subject of an entire workshop if you're doing something like teacup chain, things like that. And they could be called, they could be sung, they could be what's called hash called, which is, I kind of think, is Rodri's speciality for squares, where he makes things up on the spot. So this is an example of square, just so you see it. This is one of my... This is the one set of patter that I know, which is the Northern Lights, which is a fairly silly set of patter and a fairly light-hearted dance. I'm going to turn that up just a little bit.
Repeat and on to the next, and leave the street, and look at the northern lights. Into the igloo by the door, you clap your hands.
So I characterise this as patter rather than sung, because you certainly don't want to hear me trying to sing along to squares.
Now out of the igloo into the storm, swing your honey to generate warm. On to the next and show your form, and look at the northern lights. Into the igloo by the...
So that's more of a traditional square. The other style I thought I should really mention is modern Western square dancing. I've only ever seen modern Western square dancing at a festival once, but it is a major dance form in some places. The one time I saw it was a display at IVFDF. It's the other style with a governing body, Caller Lab. They have levels and syllabuses. You need to know certain figures before you go to certain dances a lot of the time. There's typically no walkthroughs, and it's often hash called, so the caller is making it up as you go along. There are full-on competitions. If you go and look up Western Square Dancing on YouTube, there are some fantastic videos of display sides following callers and things. It's a fairly separate tradition to any of the others in terms of overlap at festivals, though. A definite style to the costumes. And I would characterise it as not massively music-focused, which is an odd thing to say for dancing, but it's walked and, well, have a look at this.
This is a song. Heads past the ocean. Ping pong circulate. Ping pong circulate.
So they are keeping the rhythm here, but you'll find other videos where they don't quite so much. And because the figures get much more complicated, you sort of do the figures and then you line up again with the music.
Trade by Alan and left. Anorak left, great.
So that's modern Western squares. And that's me. that's kind of what I wanted to say. I hope you found that interesting. And